politics, and welcome to this review of potentially one of the best things Games Workshop has ever done. Look, I said it. It's boarding action. It's back, and in a seriously big way, with this huge compendium, is I believe what they're referring to it as, of essentially all the boarding action goodness from the previous editions of boarding action, collated into one brilliant tome with a huge amount of extra features as well. As you all probably know, I am a huge boarding action fan, so I'm very excited about this book, and we're going to review it for you right here on Free View. To do this review, I am joined by Mr. Joe Pointing.
I'm on board and ready for action.
Nice! And Katie Fode.
I don't have a good pun to do. I'm sorry.
You're adrift in the punless void.
Yes.
There you go, that's what it is. Now, I think it's safe to say we're all very excited about this book. We're all big fans of boarding action, and it's just very good.
Yes.
It's very, very good. Now, some immediate caveats is I know there was a sort of a feeling about boarding action when it first came out. And it sort of got swept under this sort of weird miasma of people being like, there was an angst about it. And I think the game itself never really got its time in the spotlight to be reviewed and sort of accepted as its own thing. Like, people complain about the cost of terrain and things like that. And these are things we all know as fans of Games Workshop products are problematic at times. But I think as a game itself, it needs to be looked at individually, and I think there's no better time than ever to do it when it is all in one book.
Well, I think now is like the best time to really review it.
Yes.
Because when it first came out, there was one set of missions.
Yes.
The rules, the terrain, and then you pick your factions and you play your games.
There were only a handful of factions available at the start, though, weren't there?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they didn't
kind of
really.
bit by
Yeah,
bit.
that's a very good point.
Yeah, it wasn't all there. So in each of the 5 books that came out after the boarding actions, terrain, and the first rule set, each one of those books would have an amount of factions for each of the amount of detachments for each of the factions. So it took a while for every army to get some rules. So it felt a bit strange initially. So now everything's here in one book. And when I say everything is in here.
Yes.
This is a really unusual thing for me and for Games Workshop.
Yeah.
It's very unusual to have a Games Workshop game where everything's in one book. That doesn't happen.
Yes.
Because normally you have to get the core rules, and then you have to get your faction rules, and then you need to
The missions are completely separate.
And you put it all together and you have several books, and it's quite complicated. With this, all of the missions, all of the detachments, everything is in one place, which is really nice.
We go into this, if you haven't already, we did do a podcast about this on our on-demand website, where there's a myriad of boarding action games available already, which is very, very good to see. And we go into depth about how we sort of felt about this and some of the stuff about Imperial Agents as well in our weekly podcast. So do check out On Demand if you haven't. But you made a really good point in that episode where you said it's a shame that this feels so unprecedented because, like you say, it feels so novel that quite literally everything you need for a game is in one book.
I think it says more about the other game systems than this one.
You do still need the core rules to go with it.
Now you do, but there's a QR code in here where you can go boop and it'll give you the PDF that's free and available.
Hooray!
Hooray!
It's free.
But it's shocking that feels so novel that an entire game is available immediately when you buy one book.
Yeah.
Which I think is a testament to kind of how boarding action feels. I think it's very sort of player first. I get a real sense of like, I'm like, as much as the next person, I love the fluff in 40k and I love all of that. But quite literally, this book opens and you got the contents, you've got some pretty pictures. This is how much of the book is rules. It immediately opens on rules. This is all game. This whole book is ways of playing the game, detachments for the game, missions for the game. It is a one-stop shop for everything you need to play boarding actions. I think that needs to be celebrated in a sense of it's quite a condensed, something easy to pick up and just go with.
It's quite easy to just grab one of those books in your gaming group and just have one to share between you because everyone can use it. It's not like, oh, one faction's in this book, so we have to get that one, but this faction's in another book, so then we have to get all of these different things. It's just one.
It's just one. And I think there's a slightly controversial thing here, is softback.
I don't like it, but...
Now, I didn't like it, but there's 2 reasons now I love it. First of all, it has this foldy out bit here.
Yeah.
Which is all your components for playing boarding action. So it shows you all the wall sections. It also allows you to do something that is long overdue in a Warhammer book, is you can actually bookmark it. So useful. It seems ridiculous, but also the thing, like you just said, Katie, if you are collecting this in a group and you're going to lug it around that has everyone's factions in, it does make it a lot easier to carry a huge book.
Well, even if you're playing one of the multiplayer games, you have 4 people, 4 of you in total playing one of the multiplayer missions. Each of the 4 of you could take a picture of your faction rule, because it's only generally about 2 pages.
Yeah. So across a double page spread.
Yeah.
So it's 1 picture.
So you go, click, and then you've all got your faction rules that you can then refer to this book for the mission rules, and then you get to go.
It's great. You're good to go. Yeah. It's so well thought out. It's just great. So in terms of what boarding action is,
what is boarding action?
Because some of you might be watching this.
Best game ever.
It is the best game ever. But essentially, what it is it's like a zoomed-in version of Warhammer 40,000. It still uses the core rules, unlike something like Combat Patrol, which is sort of a weird hybrid and feels very much like, here's the models we found down the back of the sofa. Let's make rules for them.
Or Kill Team, which is completely different.
Or Kill Team, which is totally different. Yeah. This is the Warhammer 40,000 core rules, but essentially rules for basing a battle inside a spaceship or indoors.
Yeah.
So kind of think Zone Mortalis in games like that previously, but this is set like you have a 500-point boarding action or boarding force that you then embark on a mission. So it's a bit more quick fire, it's very rapid, and the rules and how the game functions represents those kind of more frantic, fast-paced missions. So we actually did a how to play on boarding action when it first released, which should be available right now on YouTube. So do check that out if you want to learn how boarding action works and don't understand the game, because I think not a huge amount has changed from the core boarding action rules, and I think it's very well designed that it will sit on top of most every edition. And they've kind of done a lot of future-proofing here. There's some specific things to 10th edition, but if 11th rolled around in a week's time, this would still fit on top of those core rules.
The things they've created for the game are to be balanced for boarding actions,
yes,
rather than, oh, if this changes, then we need to change. Because the detachments are completely different from what you get in the core game, you don't have to really worry about new editions coming out.
Exactly, and we'll get on specifically to the detachments bit, because that's very exciting later in this video, so stay tuned for that. But that's a really good point of they are all uniquely balanced to either remove core rules that it will reference, and saying like, this is how these things play in boarding action. So for example, how deep striking works when you're inside a spaceship, how if you have a Terminator holding a door closed, what a guardsman needs to do to try and prise that door open. It has very clever rules that have stayed unchanged for you boarding action bosses that are already au fait with how the game works. If, for example, you have a unit that is around a corner, there might be 5 models in that unit. If 2 are out around the wall and you shoot them, they die, but everyone else behind the wall stays safe. So it's far more, you have to be really careful with your movements and sort of be more, if you're fully exposed, you have no protection, but if you're behind the wall, you are safe. So it's very interesting how that works.
It's all very common sense.
Yes.
Yeah, line of sight makes more sense, because when you go down to see what your models can see, you can only deal with the models that you can see, rather than being able to
you're not killing stuff behind walls.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, oh, I can see one person's foot, so I've killed a whole squad. It's very sensibly designed, and it feels good. I think it's something that should always be said for boarding actions. It feels really tight.
There's 25 pages of rules that cover all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's really not that extensive.
No. And if you're even if you're new to 40k, it follows a lot of the same principles, and like you mentioned, once you play a couple of games, it just kind of makes sense as to how it works. Yeah,
I find myself having to refer back to that far less than, say, some of the stuff in the core rules about, for example, if we needed to know like how you had the whole pivot thing and how wings work on big models. This is very much like, can you see something? No, well, it can't be shot at. So it's things like that it's very succinct, and I think because it's got a more of a focused view of the game, that really helps it along and keeps the momentum of the games. You very rarely get bogged down on sort of rules questions. It's very well laid out as well, which is nice. It's very clear about stuff. It will be more like, this is the rule. It's not like, here's an interpretation. It will try and clear things up as much as possible and give sort of examples of how it would work, which is nice to see. So it's not so, wordy.
Yeah, the rule set is more rigid, but the flavour really comes in the added stuff. But it makes it easy to just get into it and play.
Exactly, yeah. So some things that have changed then in its transition from sort of 9th edition into 10th edition. Obviously, we now have leader abilities that were never a thing before. Which is unique to 10th edition, and there are rules to adapt that into boarding action. I'm not sure how I feel about the leader rules, because I still have a sort of a on-again, off-again relationship with them in 10th edition anyway. But there is now a stratagem that allows a leader unit to bestow its ability onto a unit. You can't attach characters to units in boarding action, so there has to be a bit of structure around how that operates. I don't think that was necessary. I think you probably could just say one character can attach. I think would have kept it a bit easier, but I understand why they've done it to maybe stop certain characters buffing up units a bit too much. But all the decisions they've made seem very sensible, and I'm looking forward to playing some games with it now all together, and you don't have to homebrew anything anymore, because it's all in one book,
yes.
Which is very nice. So that's the rulesy bit. Let's get into the very exciting thing of that, the missions. Because that is ultimately what 141 pages of this book are all missions.
Yeah, so basically this is a collection of the 5 books worth of missions from Arcs of Omen.
Yes.
There were some extra ones in a White Dwarf as well, weren't
There
there?
were, yes,
So
the
it's all been
Dark
combined.
Depths mission. Yes, so that is only a small section, but within the Dark Depths mission, it uses different quarters of the board, which you can then move around, and you can make 60 odd different configurations.
So based on a bit of rudimentary maths, because you've got 8 layouts, if you did 8 layouts 8 ways, I think it works out as like sort of
8 times 8 is 68, isn't it?
Yeah. So you'd have 68 different potential map layouts.
Yeah.
And that's just 2 pages of the 141 pages of missions.
64, sorry.
64. I can't do I was always terrible at my times tables. I used to just sing along. better. But yeah, there's so much in there, and it's broken down in I think a far cleverer way than with the Arcs of Omen. Obviously, you had to buy a book, and then it was sort of had a theme to it. Yep. If you hadn't bought Arcs of Omen Abaddon, and you just bought the Lion, then you just get the campaign supplement. Whereas this is all of it all together and lays them out in a symmetric missions, so it's kind of if you want complete balance. Asymmetric missions, the Rock Besieged, it's very clear of like these are your completely balanced, even layouts. These are your attacker-defender layouts. These are your campaign missions, but it's all here.
Does it have a campaign tree in it?
It
or like
doesn't.
A suggested campaign tree?
It suggests you use the Crusade rules from the core rulebook. It says some things in there won't necessarily make sense in boarding actions, but just have a conversation before you begin. And agree on some things.
I like that energy.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. And I think is my favourite takeaway from this, is it has that kind of PlayStation 2 multiplayer era vibe to it, of that here's essentially a map editor with the Dark Depths, here's multiplayer missions, which shouldn't be understated how fun they are. Like there's one where literally you have one unit all in the middle, and then you have the rest of your armies are in the corners.
Yeah.
So you've got to go rescue your characters fighting in the middle.
Yeah.
It has this kind of free-for-all energy that's very player-centric of, we're going to give you all the tools. There's an option for balanced loadouts. There's an option for narrative stuff. There's an option for attacker-defender. You pick how you want to play. There's no prescribed, this is the main game, and then here's Crusade. It's just, here's all your options, go.
Yeah.
And I really like that energy to it, and I think that's a really good way of phrasing it. It has that kind of ask your opponent's permission energy to it, which is nice.
I think on top of that as well, now, I think I mentioned before, now everything's together. I think previously, I can't exactly remember how much the Arcs of Omen books cost, but they must have been about 20, 30 quid, something like that. So getting all of those was a bit of an expense. Now it's all been put together, the cost of it has reduced dramatically. So I think now, with all of the missions, I think there's 54 in total. And if you think about it from a 2-player perspective, one's attacker, one's defender, you both got your own objectives. So if you then play that one mission twice, one's attacker, one's defender, and you swap, there's then 108 potential missions that you could play. So I think, and
that's just if you're sticking in the same faction.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, like you said before, when it first came out, there was some maybe disappointment about the cost of entry into boarding action, because the terrain set is quite expensive for what it is. But I think now with this compendium, if you have the boarding action terrain set, you don't have to have it. You could use graph paper. It is much better with the terrain set because you can open the doors and it's much easier to play. The terrain set plus this book, with the amount of missions you have from 2 to 4 players, it's actually, for the amount of variety that you have and the potential amount of different missions that you could play, is actually very, very good value.
Yeah,
very good value.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember if I ever actually said this at the time. I think I thought about it like after we did a live stream. I've said it once and I'll say it again. I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. No one complains about, say, your Red Dead Redemptions or your Grand Theft Autos and the amount of fun you get out of those based on the price of the games console. Do you know what I mean? The game itself is really good and has so much potential in there. And actually, when you think about it, the amount of fun you'll get out of it, the amount of hours played you'll get out of the terrain and the missions, actually kind of returns on its investment far quicker than other things necessarily do. There's hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of game in here that I think kind of gets lost in the weeds with saying, oh, that seems like an expensive terrain set.
Not kind of to mention the other half of boarding action that isn't the terrain is much cheaper to buy into than a game of 10th edition of you and your opponent both have to buy your codexes, cards if you need them.
So true.
2,000 points of an army, not to mention the time investment to also get painted. Because models are expensive. Really expensive.
Really expensive,
500 points is much, literally a quarter.
Massively so. And I think also to that point as well, what's really exciting about that is if you're someone that wants to get into Warhammer and is sort of interested in multiple factions, you can kind of do a little bit of everything. You might be interested in the Drukhari and Dark Angels and a little bit of Chaos and like Tau. You can collect 500 points of each, and then you can then invite a buddy round and they can pilot one of those armies, and you have a ton of games here for the same kind of investment of 2,000 points worth of one faction. So I think if you're someone who likes to jump around the hobby, I think it's such a palatable way in to Warhammer that I think would be, I'd love to see GW sort of sing about it a bit more as being a really good entry level way to play the game.
It's also a good use of time as well, because painting 500 points worth of miniatures is much quicker than than getting a whole army ready. And also playing the games or being able to play several games, let's say over a weekend, you could get through like 4 or 5 of these if you wanted to.
100%,
and also if you do get absolutely smashed in one game, it's quite easy to re-rack and go again.
I think and you've made this point before, Katie, as well. Actually, what's amazing about boarding action is despite the fact you might be thinking like, oh yeah, but I can even think of like 500 points, that'd be really spicy. The nature of how the game works and how the missions are designed kind of prevents anyone getting smashed,
They've done a very, very good job of creating the core rules and taking out some of the busted things that would normally be in the faction rules to make everything very balanced. You do have strong stuff, but they've got counters, and I do think, because it's such a rigid rule set, it is the most tactical way to play.
40k. 100%, Especially if you're doing those symmetric missions, it's like you're on such an even footing. And it also, I think, the nature of how the stat trees work in Warhammer, it kind of leans into armies' strengths of that, say orcs, there's loads of them, right? But it doesn't matter if one really tough Terminator is holding the door closed, because they can't get through. They have to fight one at a time. So I think the nature of how the board works and the sort of close confines really levels the playing field for all factions, of that if you're quick and nimble like the Eldar, you can zip around and sort of outmaneuver your opponent. But if you're a big lumbering brute, you could just hold a hallway and it's like, nothing's getting past you. I think that's a really clever bit of game design that makes the games feel thematic, but also super balanced.
It makes it easier on the player as well when you're trying to figure out how to play an army well when you've got fewer points on the board. It's a bit less overwhelming.
Yes, exactly. And I think you learn your army's strengths there of like, oh, these guys are really rugged and resilient. These guys are really quick and nimble, because it kind of reduces armies to their sort of base. They're not the base roles. They're not like are they rock, paper, or scissors? Not when you have this buff, this buff, this buff, and this supplement, then they're everything. It's like a nice leveling of things.
It's like a proving ground for units.
It's so good. The missions are brilliant.
They're also split quite nicely. So like you mentioned before, the symmetric missions are very even. You've got asymmetric, which is more of like a linear path to the end of the game for both players.
They normally have like a sort of an end condition, the asymmetric ones.
Yeah, for sure. You've got the Rock Besiege, which is your campaign stuff, which will fit nicely into Crusade. You've got narrative missions, which are just sort of fun, like the Red Angel's Wake on page 100. You get to a point during the game where Angron just cuts your ship in half. Yeah. At some point, and then the board is split. Your units can then jump from one to another. It's crazy. You've got breaching operation missions, which is sort of like DLC. Yes. Because you can get a additional set of terrain, which gives you things like door jammers. You have like access terminals and things, so you can add in more terrain.
You can breach with like
breachable walls. You've got Dark Depths, which is the White Dwarf one, and then you've got multiplayer, so you can have 2, 3, or 4 players.
It's amazing.
It's great.
Yeah. And I think it shouldn't be understated as well, the sort of passion and care that's been put into these missions is none of them feel like, that's a bit of a like some of these symmetric ones are a bit like, okay, here's sort of basic mission structures, but a lot of they've given the amount of missions, the amount of unique things in there. Like there's one, it's like Gellerfield Collapse, and there's strips of the board that you roll a dice for, and that has been sort of taken by the warp. Yep. So no one can see in strip 2 because all the lights have gone out suddenly. Yeah. Or
remember getting vented into space?
Exactly. there's one game mode where like you roll a dice and a certain section of the ship, all the doors will close and the whole thing just gets vacuumed out into space.
Yeah. Lost nearly my entire army doing that once. It was hilarious.
Genuinely, it's so well thought out.
I recently did Empiric Erosion, which is really cool because there's so much strategy around like hiding behind walls and opening doors at the right time. Empiric Erosion, every turn you roll a dice and just a piece of terrain gets removed.
So cool.
So you could be hiding, all of a sudden it's like, I'm completely out in the open. It's very fun.
There's like jailbreaks, there's the ferryman, which is just, there's the ferryman, and it's like a weird, creepy warp entity. And it's like, one team needs to defend it, one team needs to slay the warp entity. It's like, oh my, that's cool.
Yeah. It very much feels like playing a video game.
It really does, yeah.
And none of them are similar.
No.
There's no repeats. Nothing feels anything like any of the other missions.
Because even the symmetric ones, it'll be like, there's an objective in the middle called the furnace, and it will heat up.
Yeah.
But you could approach it from the same kind of direction. It's so
this isn't hold 1, hold 2, hold more.
It's so cool.
And that one box of boarding actions terrain makes a completely different board 54 times. Which is wild.
And I think that
clever.
Yeah.
I want to give them a little bit of appreciation for that.
And I think I think that's actually fair. Like it is an expensive box. Yeah. But I think realistically, many people don't have 18 pieces of Nachman terrain or 18 pieces of the Basilicum terrain. So I think we live in a world where people know that they create MDF shapes and stuff for the main game. For whatever the buy-in is for the terrain, it is expensive, but it creates 54 different maps. Yeah. Like that, it's pretty good value for what it actually does. Yeah. It's just, I think, obviously you want to be spending your money on minis rather than walls. I get that.
Speaking of which, so the missions, as we mentioned, are a collection of pre-existing missions from several books. Yeah. What's completely new in here are all the faction rules.
So many of them.
All of the Arcs of Omen books which made up the missions and things and rules for boarding actions previously have been completely replaced.
They have been completely replaced. Yeah. And not only have they been replaced, they've been replaced by multiple options. This is something I was not expecting. No. I thought maybe there'd be a handful here.
Because you get, in the old version, you just got one per.
Got one per faction.
One per faction.
Now, some stuff isn't in here, like your Blood Angels, your Templars, your Dark Angels. Like this specific stuff isn't there. But my caveat to that would be everything is accounted for, and there's kind of something for everyone. At first, I was a little bit wary of it, because one of the things I love about boarding action, unlike Combat Patrol, is it's not prescriptive. It's like, take whatever you want in 500 points. Yeah. There's certain things you can't take a tank, obviously, because it's indoors. But, you know what I mean? There's certain limitations. Even fly, it's like you can't fly anymore, but you move 9 inches. Yeah. So it's thought about, but it's like whatever you've got in your current collection, you can pick a few models and you can play. Whatever you want to buy, you can buy those things and play it. I was a little bit worried when there was attachments, but pretty much every faction has this is everything. Yeah. So for example, with the Adeptus Astartes, you have the boarding strike, which is your intercessors, your Hellblasters, your characters, and it pretty much has a line for you can take one of or two of all the character options. You can take one of your elite options. You can take two of your battle line options. Gives you all of that, gives you a detachment rule, gives you 4 stratagems, and gives you 2 unique enhancements. And I was like, that's pretty cool. That's quite a lot for Space Marines. It's a shame Phobos and Terminators aren't represented. Then I turned the page. Pylum Strike Team, all Phobos.
Yeah.
Terminator Assault, all Terminators.
Yeah.
So they've kind of leaned into, cool, you can't take your Terminators in your regular boarding strike, but if you want to take Terminators, here's a whole Terminator team, and it then sends them turbo. Because it's thought about, well, if you're taking Terminators, you probably only got 11 models, because you'll take 2 units of 5 at a character. That's not a lot of room to cover the whole ship. So they get stratagems such as carve a path, which means an assault squad can just move through a doorway. It's just like, nope. It will just move straight through the doorway in its movement phase, kick it down, move into the next room so it can move, charge, shoot, do what it wants.
Powerful men.
Exactly, powerful men. And also their detachment rule is their oath at the moment rerolls hits and wounds. So the idea if they do make it into combat, they're getting the job done, for they are Terminators.
Yeah.
It's a really clever way of rebalancing the scales of all the factions to be like, if you want to do something specific and fun, you've literally created a detachment for that purpose.
So you can't take like the normal Terminators in the boarding strike. See, that's really good because then they don't have to worry about balancing it for both detachments.
Yeah.
This is what I mean. It's such a good and tight rule set.
It's really cool.
Normally I don't like restrictions, but again, it kind of makes sense for boarding actions. So when you're mustering your boarding patrol for the boarding strike detachment, you can take up to one of each of the following: aggressors, Blade Guard veterans, company heroes, death company ancestors, blah, 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 blah. Later on, it says you can include up to one of the following: eradicators or hellblasters. So they've thought about, if you took a bunch of hellblasters and a bunch of eradicators, that's going to be rough for your opponent. So it's good that they have done some restrictions.
You can take one of those units. Also, they've done a lot of what you'll see in a lot of the detachment, they have rules adaptations. That's essentially stripping away things that in boarding action, Hellblasters don't get for the chapter in boarding action. Because to be fair, if you've exploded from your plasma gun, if you start shooting wildly because you've overcharged, you're probably hitting your own men. So it's like they've thought about that and evened it out a little bit.
Most everything that has the rule of at the end of your opponent's turn, you can go into deep strike and come back out, that's taken away because that's really strong in boarding action.
They've also adjusted deep strike rules that they didn't previously in boarding action. Now, a lot of people sort of exploited this, of that because movement is measured and distance is measured around corners in boarding action. Deep strike works like it does in regular 40k. So you can't deep strike 9 inches away round the corner. You have to literally deep strike 9 inches away horizontally. So that might mean you're in a separate part of the ship rather than I'm behind the door. Like you literally have to deep strike normally, which again makes it more fun for the purposes of boarding action.
I have made a starting discovery.
Yes.
Which is mildly relevant.
Yes.
Deathwatch have changed recently.
Yes.
But Deathwatch Terminator is going to be taking the Terminator Assault detachment. They live on.
They live on!
my poor army, my Deathwatch Terminators, and my Deathwatch Captain.
Lives!
Gorm is alive!
Boarding action patrol now.
Incredible.
I love it. There you go.
What a wonderful
Amazing.
time.
Just scouring the skies.
Yeah.
The space skies.
The space skies. Also, another relevant thing, there's a stratagem in the Pylum Strike team to give Reavers AP on their combat knives.
Yay! Thanks, everyone.
We did it! But yeah, I think I was surprised at not only how well done the detachments are, how many of them there are.
Yeah, but, apart from one detachment, and one of these is sort of made up, everything has at least 2. Some of them have 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So demons, for instance, have 5. Eldari have got 4. Astartes have got 3. Thousand Sons have 3 for some reason. It's cool. And they're all very flavorful.
They're very flavorful. Like,
should we talk about our favourites real quick? So I like the Pandemoniac Inferno.
Just a lot of pandas.
I mean, it was the name.
Sorry, the joke was right there.
The name grabbed me. Where is it?
It was.
Right, so this is basically Zinch demons. So the thing I like about this is that it sort of feels like you're fighting the void, and like your enemies are everywhere. sort of vibe. So you can take Flamer Screamers, Blue Horrors, Pink Horrors, and then a few characters, including the Changeling and the Changecaster, etc. Any enemy units within 7 inches of your Tzeentch units are hunted, and at that point they lose the benefits of cover, and you can charge enemy units that aren't visible. So they nice. Come out the walls effectively, cool. Which is very cool. The detachment rule is Living Flame, which allows them to shoot into combat, which again for me just sort of like represents them swirling everywhere endlessly and impossibly. They get Sustained 1 as well in the Maelstrom, which is fun. You can give enhancements to make your characters -1 to hit. There's some cool stratagems that enhance that vibe as well. It's fun.
It's super cool. It's really trickery.
Fun. Yeah,
it's very cool.
And I think this is a great example of how they've taken a sub-faction within Demons and made them feel like they're representing the model range and the fluff. Like they're impossible, they're everywhere, they're very scary.
I think it speaks to when you do restrict something enough, you don't want it to be like it's then prohibitive to play, and I think they've made a sensible decision. It's kind of a like all-comers detachment.
Yeah.
But then here's a cool idea, because when you really zoom in, you make it focused, you can then balance it to be exciting and feel flavorful of that. Yeah, if you've only got 11 models on the board, you can make Terminators super powerful. If you've only got Tzeentch Demons, you can make them all floaty and weird and relocate and be able to shoot into combat and be tricksy, because you're not then, I'm also going to add a Lord of Change. It's like, well, you've only got a certain number of things, and it just adds lots of play styles. And speaking of play styles,
Tyranids.
Yeah!
This is the Tyranid boarding swarm. I'm dubbing it in my head the old sneak and spook.
Yes.
Because, so you can include up to 2 of the following: Death Leaper, Lictor, Neurolictor, and then Hormagaunts, Raveners, and Leapers.
Oh!
So it is the sneaky, spooky, scary Tyranids, which makes me very happy. They get the army rule. This is just for Tyranids in general, that Synapse ignores walls and closed hatchways,
which makes sense.
So that it actually functions, which is very nice. Their detachment rule, each time an enemy unit within engagement range of 1 or more of your Tyranids units is selected to fall back after it's ended the fallback move, if there are no other enemy units within engagement range of your Tyranids, you can make a normal move of up to 3 inches. Slink and sneak.
Oh, that's cool. Like
so they get to slink back into the shadows. Which is just makes me very happy as how scary these things should be.
Cool.
Now, you can't take any enhancements for this detachment.
Oh,
it literally
don't
says,
need them.
don't need them. Cannot be given enhancements. These hunter organisms are already perfectly tailored to their task. The hive mind does not waste biomass in
even that's cool. That makes so much sense.
Cool. Yeah.
That's so cool. And they,
it's just, I think, and what I love about it as well is that's like within Tyranids, they've thought like, here's the, there's like Tyranid attack
Tyranid attack is the main one, which is just very cool. So you can take your warriors, Hormagaunts, like all your gribbly stuff. And then you've also got the Biotide, which again is just swarm.
Yeah.
Which is very cool.
It's very cool. There's also a really nice little Easter egg in here. There's a faction called the Great Devourer, which I looked into, which is for Gene Stealer cults and Tyranids, that allows you to take Patriarch or Broodlord and Gene Stealers, so kind of your Space Hulk detachment.
Yeah,
and that's cool. I think we might have to do that as a little boarding action, like
ode to Space Hulk.
An ode to Space Hulk. So stay tuned for that if you do want to look on demand. That'll be there soon, I presume, because I won't be able to help myself. So with the Great Devourer one, it has the detachment of half glimpsed shadows. So unless you're within 6, everyone's -1 to hit, because they can't. They're they're coming out the walls. And I think
like that bit in Angels of Death.
Yeah, but they just sort of like
crawling all around.
Spore sensitivity. They can charge around corners and stuff as well because they know you're there. But my single favourite rule in maybe all of these for the detachments is for the orcs. In the Captain Killers detachment, which is like your knobs and your big orcs, their detachment rule is called Coming Through. And if anything is lower than your toughness, you can just walk through it. So the idea is they're so focused on getting to the captain and doing the business that if you screen anything with like, oh, I'm going to hide my, Space Marine Terminator captain behind these intercessors, they just go, nope, I just move straight through them. And I think it's stuff like that that really makes each faction, like I think something mad like Khorne Demons can move through doorways It's not just they can move through doorways, like they can rip them open. They melt them, so they can't be closed again. It's like, oh, I've closed the door. No, you haven't. I'm a demon. And I think it's so much, it really feels like they've kind of been let off the lead a bit with this.
Yeah.
To make something that they're passionate about, and it really comes through.
Yeah.
I think this is what I was saying about having such a rigid rule set and restrictions on your detachments really allow you to bring that fun little flavor into it without it busting the game.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it's still completely balanced. But some of these rules are unhinged.
Yeah.
In the best way.
Yeah, because it's that thing of like, if you are, and I think because they've restricted it, obviously if you had like all these orc boys that can just move through everything, maybe that's too much. When it's the elite orcs, you know you don't have as many models. So they're a bit slow, they need to make their choice charges. So actually something like that, while super fluffy, allows them to play the game of like, well, if I can only fight your chaff, I'm gonna lose. So they've, so much thought I feel has gone into this. Obviously, like as we play, I'm sure some detachments will be quite spicy, and that is the nature of these things. But from an initial glance and from our initial thoughts, this really feels, and I don't know, this will be out by the time this releases, but I don't know what this will RRP for. I don't know, but it feels like a book that, and Ed was saying this recently, if you purchase this, it will give you longevity. It's not like I'm buying a codex that in a couple of years' time you know is going to be invalidated. Like this has been, like it's like a little hat that goes over whatever the core rules is. And granted, there are specific things to 10th edition, but that with a swift FAQ could be resolved.
I also feel like this is a really good show of faith. That they've done all of this and updated all of it to 10th and created so much content for it with all the factions and all the different detachments, that this is something they do want to keep pushing. Because I know that was a massive worry when Boarding Actions came out of, well, I'm not going to buy the game because who knows if they're going to be supporting it in a year's time. They're supporting it.
Yeah.
They've literally done a whole new book for it for 10th edition.
Yeah.
And guess what? We're still kind of at the beginning of 10th edition.
Yeah,
so this is going to be
true.
relevant until the end of that. And then if it's still successful, I see no reason why they wouldn't continue doing it.
100%. And I genuinely believe like the changes they've made to the core rules and even the detachments aren't so vastly different from 9th edition. Obviously, it's to ensure the I can never say it. Nomenclature there you go, is consistent, like sustained is in this book, whereas that didn't exist in 9th edition. But principally, if you were to buy this now and attach it to this edition, I imagine for the next few editions, unless something drastic changes, it can kind of be slotted in.
Well, this is the interesting thing. In the rules adaptations page on here, it references the balanced data slate. Nice. And it's basically saying you don't need to worry about the balanced data slate.
They've balanced it already.
Yeah, there's a separate part called the mustering rules document, which is specifically for up-to-date rules for boarding action, which will be updated from time to time. But you make a really good point. Once you bought this book, you don't need anything else ever again. No. This will last you forever. Yeah. It's great. Yeah. It's really, really cool.
And isn't it mad that that feels so rare these days?
Well, for Games Workshop,
yeah.
They done did a good thing.
Yeah. And it really makes me feel, like slightly tinfoil hat, but I feel like the designers of this were like, we're not going to let it die.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it was sort of, we're doing Combat Patrol now, we've moved on, boarding action's done, it got us through that period at the end of 9th. So I feel like they're like, no, we want to put it all together. People like this game.
They want to board the actions.
They do want to board the actions. I think if you enjoy boarding actions already, this is a great purchase. If you only have like 1 or 2 of the Arcs of Omen, this is a great way of getting all the other missions and sort of collecting it all in one neat place. Plus, just for the detachments alone, it's a bit of a bargain. Like we all know that a codex, normally you buy it and you only use the 4 detachments.
Yeah. I always feel a little bit wary about recommending anything to anyone here, but I think if anyone that is watching enjoys 40k and they want to try something new with their friends, I would completely recommend getting a box of boarding action terrain, getting this book and just enjoying it. Yeah. Because it will last you for years. Yeah. It's so good.
And try and find something you're happy to go splitsies with on the terrain.
That's the other thing. You only need to buy what you don't each individually need to buy anything. Yeah. You just need to buy one thing and split it between up to 4 people or more.
Yeah. And I think like you could make it yourself if you wanted to. Like I think it's so it's really good. Yeah. And I think I will continue to bang the boarding action drum and sing its praises, because I think Games Workshop almost don't talk about it enough. Boarding action.
Like barding action.
Yes. Hashtag barding action.
Yeah, and we're going to be covering it extensively on demand.
Yes, we are going to be covering it a lot.
We've talked about on demand a lot today, but watch the games because they're very fun. So much variety.
Yeah, and I think for those already watching on demand and watching the boarding actions, we've been sort of trying to figure out some of the changes. This is great. This is beyond our wildest hopes and dreams what we thought might happen. Yeah. So I think it's very, very good indeed.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think closing thoughts from everyone.
Big good.
Big good.
Boarding action, yay.
Boarding action, yay. Barding action, yes. Closing thoughts. I think it's great. I think it's a nice way of collating all the goodness of boarding action in one neat little package.
It's a pretty well balanced, relatively well priced gaming experience in one package
that has longevity.
It's hard to say these things because normally we're like, but it's very expensive, or but it's unbalanced, or it might get updated, or we do a code extra and it's like the points are in here, but they're completely invalid already.
That's so true.
But here we're like, this will last for years. It's so weird, but it's so good.
Yeah, there's nothing in it that we're like, well, that's not going to stand the test of time. It's like, sweet, that's a very good decision. Well made.
Just boarding action.
Yes, I think, fantastic. 5 J's out of 5. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you both for joining me.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for not boarding us to death.
Hey!
I wasn't bored at all.
And you won't be bored playing boarding actions. Until next time, I've been James Jordan, aka The Bard. I have been joined by Katie Fode, Jinx, Joe Pointing, Chaos Lord Beard. You've all been bosses. We have been Tabletop Tactics, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye!